And we are back. We needed to generate some default settings. So, part of this setup, when we created this, we kind of went through all the different settings and chose some specific default values that are common between all of the different Minecraft servers. Now, some of them are properties or settings that we hardly ever need to change, and some of them we may want to change. But common to all of them is that the server IP property, which is basically the first setting in the dialog, is something that only needs to be set if the box that's running it is tied directly to an internet IP address. That is the only case where you would ever need to set this. It doesn't happen all that often, and it is typically specific to Linux or Unix environments, not something that you would see on a Microsoft setup. And since this application basically only runs on a Microsoft environment, then it's something we basically always need to leave empty. But in any case, most of these different settings are settings that we most likely need to create some kind of defaults for. In terms of using our very nifty little ini file setup, at the moment we have a tiny problem with it. More correctly would probably be saying that we have a feature missing. Now, you may have noticed that at the top of the server properties file there are two comment lines. These two comment lines are always generated by the Minecraft server itself, and the date within the comment is always updated by the Minecraft server itself. Whether it actually uses it or not, only Mojang knows. I haven't dug that deep into the Minecraft server itself, so I don't know. But we definitely need to add a feature to our ini file class that would allow us to put in some kind of information there. That is a feature that we currently don't have in it. It does have the ability to store the comments when the virtual grouping property is set true. So I'm kind of thinking it would be nice if we could add in those two comments. At least put some kind of information in there, and then let the server generate it from there. The reason I want to add this is so that we can create a method that generates all of these default properties with the default settings that we want to put in there in case the file doesn't exist when we load up this dialog. Now, one thing that most Minecraft server owners, community administrators know like the back of their hand is that all of these settings tend to swap positions for whatever reason. The server seems to randomly spew them out whenever it rewrites the server properties file. Which is why we implemented the ini file class in the first place, because that allows us to just reference the individual key that we need instead of having to look for it in the list of keys. Alright, so before we continue on, we'll do a quick addition to this. Virtual grouping comments, and then we'll move this down here. There we go. And then we'll do a couple of methods. Clear comments, and we'll do this a public. This just lets us clear those comments in case we need it. So there, deletes any and all comments that might exist, only while virtual grouping is true. So we'll do a check here, and I can't remember whether we did this as a quick property, so I'll go check that quick. We do have this one, so we'll use that. If this one is true, then we'll kill the comments. And just for consistency, we could easily grab the exception that we've got here and add that as well. So I'll put that here. That takes care of clearing the comments in case we need it. And we'll add another one, add comment. This one should actually be above the other one. There we go. And then we'll just add in a comment. But again, we'll do this only when virtual grouping is enabled. That way we don't mix things up. So we'll do an array resize, comments.length +1. There we go. And then add the comment and trim it just in case. There we go. Adds a line of comment. Adds a comment line. Whoops. To the I don't know, configuration file. There we go. The text comment to add must be hashtag prefixed. There we go. Now we've got those, and this would then allow us to generate default settings in our server properties instance of the ini file. Okay. One thing that we definitely need to do here is add another method that allows us to do this, but just for the sake of checking, we actually do have the option to completely clear any and all keys that might exist within it. So that's beneficial when we want to do the default settings. So let's see if we can go up here, populate dialog, combo box population. We'll do a section here, internal helper methods, and then we'll do one generate default setup. There we go. All right. We need to make sure that we clear this. We also need to force this to true, just to make sure. The reason we need to force it true is because the load method has the optional flag that determines whether it should load this file with virtual grouping or not. But since we're not loading because the file doesn't exist, we kind of need to go about it a different way, and forcing the virtual grouping to true before we start generating all the default values, that would be the way to do it. So from here on, we need to figure out exactly what kind of default values we want to set. So let's have a look at the dialog quick. Now we know that we have a text box called server bind IP. That's effectively a property that should for the most part always be an empty string. So we'll start by setting that. That would then be set value. And since we are using virtual grouping, we don't have to specify the group name. It's a change I made to the ini file setup when I reappropriated all the virtual group handling. But we definitely need to specify the key name and what kind of value we want to put in there. So let's have a look at the server properties file, and we'll go with this one. So the server IP is right here. It is called server-IP. So we'll grab that, put that in there. It's empty. Next up, we'll see about specifying the port number, which would be this one right here, server port. We also have the default value, so we'll specify those. Grab this setting, server properties, set value, this one, and this would be the default value. That takes care of these two entries. The online mode checkbox we also need to set, and we find that in here somewhere, like right about here. The default value is true. You can disable this, which would then effectively allow anybody with any kind of account to log onto the server, even the illegal accounts. So I don't recommend doing this. Set value, this one, and we know that we need to set it to true. So that takes care of this. And that effectively takes care of this entire group up here. Well, in a sense, that's actually what the ini file class does, more or less. It just doesn't expose the properties as the actual property names. In my opinion, going through all the serialization stuff and generating objects based on some configuration file somewhere, it's up to personal preference in most cases. Personally, I don't like them because they tend to become very bloaty. I'm more of the kind that prefers having something that's less bloaty. Yes, and that's exactly the point. Reflection is extremely resource expensive, and it becomes very bloaty very quickly. Um, that's one of the major problems of using reflection. It's easy to do, yes, but the result is also a way bigger memory footprint for using it. And since I tend to try and avoid those kind of things, reflection is not something that I use all that often to ensure that I get the performance out of my code that I want without it ending up bloating. Another downside of using reflection is that in certain instances, when using reflection, if you don't properly clean up after yourself, you will end up creating memory leaks in your application. And a lot of developers out there use it extensively and hardly ever clean up after themselves, leaving an application that all of a sudden spends a couple of gigabytes memory just holding all the reflection results in memory that are no longer really referenced. At some point, the garbage collector might pass by and decide to clean it up, but 7 out of 10 cases it doesn't, because the reflection library basically tells the garbage collector I'm still in use. Those are the main reasons I don't use it that much. Of course, it's up to the individual developer whether he or she wants to use it. That's just my personal preference, so don't take my word for God's message to developers, because it's not. This is just how I choose to do things. In any case, we got the first box configured, server group. And the next box that we've got on the dialog deals with world generation. So let's grab that one. World generation group. And in the world generation, we've got level name, level type, generator settings, the seed, whether or not to allow the nether dimension, and the kind of spawn protection we want to put on there. It has gotten better over the years, definitely, with the introduction of, I believe, framework 3.5. Reflection has become a lot better. It is way faster and less bloaty, but still using reflection compared to the way I've implemented the inifile class is still memory-wise a huge difference. But again, it's the way I see it, it's personal preference, and I would never go out and say, hey, don't use reflection to anyone using it. It is personal choice, and it's, in my opinion, one of those typical programming language religious fights that end up occurring because one is positively for using it and the other one is negatively against using it, and that just ends up clashing those two. So personal choice. And as long as you as a developer can respect another developer's personal choice, then those two developers will get along just fine. Anyway, we need to implement these, so we'll go about putting those up. Level name, let's see if we can find that. It's in here somewhere, which would be right here. So we'll set that. The server always defaults the level name to world in lowercase letters when it generates the server properties the very first time. I know that from spending years with this stuff. But generate a new one and you'll see. This is where I wanted to go. The level type. Now, in our setup here, we've simply put a drop-down list. So let's see if we can find that particular drop-down list, which is right here. It specifies default, super flat, large biomes, amplified, and customized. The default setup for this particular setting is default. That's what generates the normal Minecraft world, so we'll put that in. And as luck would have it, that's exactly what it says in the current file, so let's put that in there. Boom. And the next one would then be the generator settings. Generator settings is basically a way where we can customize exactly how the world is generated. In the game client, when creating a single-player world, there are options where you can specify exactly how the world generator should go about generating the world, what kind of extra details to put in there, and there are even some presets that you can pick from a list and then have the game generate a world that matches that preset. When level type is set to default, for the most part generator settings is ignored. Some servers over the years have still accepted changes to the default profile by means of actually putting in some generator settings, but as far as I know, as long as level type is set to default, the Minecraft server or world generator ignores the generator settings. Generator settings right here is empty, so we shall put that in as empty. Set this one to nothing. There we go. And the next one would then be the level seed. That's the only thing that affects how the default world generation takes place. The seed determines exactly how to generate stuff. It's all procedurally generated using a specific seed, so you can either specify one or have the either server or game client generate a random one. When a new server starts up, level seed is always set to empty, and that effectively forces either the game client or the server to pick some random seed. And as long as you are server operator or have console access, you can always use the /seed command to have the game report the seed of this particular world. So we shall set this and fetch it from here. Let's see if we can find it. It should be in here somewhere. Level type, level name, level seed, there it is. And leave that empty. And then we need to determine whether we want to allow the nether dimension, since that's enabled by default. We should also default it to enabled. Let's see if we can find it in here somewhere. There it is. I got blind there for a minute. There we go. Default this to true. And the final one we need to set up is the spawn protection. Spawn protection determines a radius of blocks in a sense, around the actual world spawn point where normal players cannot break those blocks. It's just to ensure that whenever a new player spawns, that player actually has a surface to spawn on. But it can easily be changed. And the default setting for that is 16. And the spawn protection is here. So we'll grab that. And that pretty much takes care of the world generation group. Then we'll do the world options now that we're here. So we'll do the world options group. And world options allows us to specify whether things like villages and temples and stuff are generated, whether we want villagers to spawn, whether we want miscellaneous different animals to spawn, and whether it should be effectively on peaceful or not. So we'll put these in here. Generate structures would be the first one. So we'll need to set a default for that. Generate structures is right there. We'll set that to true. The next one we need to set is the NPC. So we'll set that. And it's right here. So spawn NPCs. Default that to true. And then we'll add in the one that controls whether animals should spawn or not. And it's called spawn animals right here. Like so. Server properties set value. And the final one would be the one that determines whether hostiles will show up. So spawn monsters is in here somewhere, right there, and we'll also default that to true. And that takes care of the world options. We have two groups left. One is the player options, and the other one is message of the day. Message of the day is basically the text that's shown on the server profile in the game client's multiplayer list. This can be changed any way you see fit, but it is the actual text that's shown along with the server profile once the client has found it. We'll go through player options. Player options group. For this one we have another drop-down box that determines game mode. Game mode is a setting that allows us to configure it for survival, which is default. We can configure it for creative, for spectator mode, and so on and so forth. And we have another setup for it right here that populates the drop-down box with survival, creative, adventure, and spectator. So those are the ones that we need to put in there. And as you can see here, these are numeric values, so we need to specify a number. By default, game mode is always set to 0 for a survival game, so that's what we need to set it at. Not this one, game mode, which is right here, set to 0. Now, whoops, that's what I wanted to do. Right here there is an additional option that says force game mode. This is one of the newer settings for the servers. The purpose of this particular setting is to, when enabled, it will ensure that every single player on that particular server always has this configured game mode, which effectively means that say a server operator would not be able to switch to spectator mode if his up level is lower than 4. Um, the up permission level determines how um, forcefully the settings of the server are applied to the server operator. So if you change the up permission level to a lower setting, then force game mode will definitely be applied. It's a newer setting. Not quite sure why they decided to put that in there, but it's in there. Since we are just generating the most needed default values, we'll stick with not messing about with that one, because we don't know if it exists in this particular version of a Minecraft server that's being booted up. Say we decided to start up a 1.4.7 server. I know for a fact that force game mode doesn't exist as part of the server properties for that version. So it would just be removed from the server anyway. And next up would then be the difficulty setting. Again, we have a drop-down list just for making it easier for us to configure it. And the final drop-down is configured here. We have peaceful, easy, normal, and hard. These are modifiers that determine in peaceful mode things like spawn monsters is effectively overruled. If you force the difficulty to be peaceful, no monsters will spawn during the night. The default setting for difficulty is easy, which means we need to specify a 1 since it's numeric. So we'll specify that. Need to specify a 1, and then we need to find the difficulty setting, which is right here. So we'll grab that one, put it in there, and then we'll see what the next one is. Hardcore mode. And hardcore mode to some extent ignores difficulty by means of effectively banning the player from the server if he dies once. So in hardcore mode, you definitely don't want to die. The different difficulty settings for easy, normal, and hard are effectively damage and health modifiers for all the hostile mobs, as well as things like fall damage. In hard mode, you take a lot more fall damage than you do in normal or easy mode, for example. It also affects the player's ability to regenerate health, as well as changes the hunger bar. So those settings modify some of those features of the game. Let's get the hardcore mode put in here. Hardcore, which is right here. It always defaults to false. This is one setting that you would have to go in and change yourself. So we'll put this in. There we go. Next up is the PvP. PvP is by default always enabled. So we will have to do that as well. So we'll put that to true, and then we'll go find the key, which is just called PvP. There we go. Next up, announce player achievements in chat. This particular setting was added, I believe it was in 1.7.8, somewhere around that, and the stable build of the 1.7 branch is still the 1.7.10 version. So for the most part, the versions of Minecraft that players are playing today would include 1.7.10, which also has this setting, but older servers don't have it, so they will basically just ignore it and remove it from the server properties altogether once the server has been started. We'll put it in there so we can quick configure it here. So we'll add that. It is always default enabled. Announce, achieve. It's not in here. It should be. Let's see. Might not be in here. Yeah, I might have removed it. Actually, I'll need to go look it up quick. Minecraft server properties, so I can get the actual name of it. It's in here somewhere. Let's see, what is it called? I thought it was in here. Let's see. Player idle timeout, up permission, online mode, network compression, blah 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 blah. Pardon me, I seem to have forgotten entirely about this one. Not quite sure why I put it in there. It might be a retired key, actually. Nope. A quick skim. I'm not exactly seeing it in here, so I guess we will just get rid of it. Or actually, we could probably replace it with something else, because I do believe that I didn't put in the command block. So we could potentially migrate that one key over to world options and then make an allowance for that. Announce player achievements in chat. I was sure it was in there. Let's see. Nope, it's not in here. Okay. We will get rid of it then. Bye bye. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. Yeah, we'll set it here. Then we shall add one more to the world options, because this is basically a world option. There is a specific block in the game called a command block, which is a very powerful tool because it effectively allows access to executing console commands by means of that particular block, activating it using a redstone signal. This particular block is somewhat dangerous enabling because players might be able to access it. So it should really be used with a lot of thought. But we'll put it in here because every now and then I do enable it because I need one specific function that the normal gameplay can't grant, say for example spawning a new set of tools for a new player that has joined in, just as an example. Command blocks also allow us to do things like teleport the player out of the server spawn area, stuff like that. So we'll put it in here. Enable command block. And we'll do enable command block. Warning. May be dangerous doing. There we go. Okay. We'll go back and fix that. Let's see, put that there, move these up a bit. And there. Nice, my OCD is satisfied. Okay, enable PvP, max player slots, 20. That definitely belongs in here, so we'll get the player slots. It defaults to 20, which we should be able to find in here somewhere. Max players right there. We'll set that to 20, and this would be the view distance, so we'll put that in there as well. View distance has since, God knows, I think it's since the 1.6 branch defaulted to 10. Oh yeah. Everything turns into view distance. There we go. View distance heavily impacts server performance. Anyone running a Minecraft server on a non-SSD drive should never ever set view distance above 7, simply because it impacts the disk performance heavily. It also impacts the amount of memory spent, and if there are a lot of players on the server, it could be beneficial lowering the view distance to reduce the memory footprint of the server itself. Large communities typically run these at lower settings to conserve a bit of memory. Basically what the view distance does is whenever a player navigates around the world, the player navigates through map segments called chunks. Each chunk is 16 by 16 blocks, and whichever chunk the player is in acts as the center chunk. From there, in all 4 directions, an additional view distance chunks are loaded, meaning 10 chunks north, 10 chunks east, 10 chunks south, and 10 chunks west. So you actually end up loading up 21 by 21 chunks if you have a view distance of 10, and that's per player. And we can do the math quick. 21 by 21, that's a total of 441 chunks that are being loaded constantly while the player is online. So if you have say 100 players on your server, then at all times the server keeps at least 44,100 chunks loaded into memory. That takes up quite a bit of memory, because the chunks are basically decompressed when they're loaded into memory. So that's a lot of data to keep track of with a lot of players. Lowering the view distance drastically reduces this. If we lower it down to a view distance of 7, then it becomes 7 plus 7 plus the one in the middle, that's 15, times 15, that's 225 chunks. And with 100 players, you are then down to 22,000 chunks instead of 44,000. So that's effectively cutting it in half. Alright, view distance. The last one we need to set is the whitelisted server flag. So we'll go find that one. And that one is right there. The server generates the whitelist setting default as false. So if you want to run a whitelisted server, you have to change that. So we'll disable this. There we go. And then we need to go back to the world options and enable the or add the enable command block option. So we'll go back here and add that set value, and this should default be false. So we'll go and fetch it. The command block has been around for a long time, so there shouldn't be all that big issues putting it in here. As you can see, I've actually enabled it on the local vanilla server. Put that in there. And the last one we need to set is the message of the day. So we'll add that. Message of the day. Server properties, set value, MOTD, a Minecraft server. That's basically the default text that's put in there. Alright, so we now have the ability to generate a default setup. Since we're doing that before the form is shown in the set Minecraft server path method, these settings will be pre-configured before we actually start updating the UI. So we'll add that in here. There we go. And then we'll go through and see what else we managed to put in here. Populate level type, game mode and difficulty. These just populate the 3 drop-down boxes. So we have a populate dialog that we need to go check, which is right here. Okay, so let's see. Bind IP, the port number, and online mode. These we already did back then. So we just need to finish off the rest of them. World generation. So for world generation we need to set the level name, which is txt level name. Txt level name text equals server properties get value level name. There we go. And then we need to set the selected index of the combo box to whichever level type is set. But since we don't exactly know which one is set, we kind of need to build a little helper method to assist us with that. So we'll do a int select combo box index. Now actually we may need to look through it to find the exact one, and if whatever level type we're looking for doesn't exist, then we will force it to select the one first in the list, which would be default. So let's build something that can do that. Okay. It would have to return an int because we need to set the selected index of the combo box. So this would then be the level type. Select level type, and then we know we will get a string level type, and then we will force it to default. that would be the first list index, since that's the first item that we add to the drop-down box. Okay, so we know that level type will be returned as a string, but we need it to be a number so we can properly check it. To that end, we could just use our fixint, so we can see if this actually matches something we know. Fixint level type, and then we need to check whether the resulting value is within range of however many items are in here. So we'll do that. If this is greater than or equal to 0 and it's less than the level type.items.count, then it matches, and we will simply return the index. Otherwise it returns 0. Now if for some reason that particular property from the server properties file is empty, then we know that fixint will still return a 0, which then forces it back to default. So we should be good there. Level type dot selected index equals select level type server properties dot get value level type. That takes care of that. Next up, the generator settings. That's also just a string we need to dump in there, so we'll dump that. Get value, and these are called what? Let's go grab it. Generator settings, like so. Go fetch that quick. Boom. Next up, we need to add the level seed if one exists. So that's basically the same thing. Level seed, server properties, get value, level seed. I think it's level dash seed, isn't it? Let's see, yeah, level seed, and then allow dash nether and spawn protection. And that one would be the checkbox that we need to set, which is called chk allow nether. So allow nether dot checked equals full default server properties dot get value allow nether, and we know that this one defaults to true. Yes, I know we're kind of double setting these. It's I guess we could potentially just clear the file and then set them from whatever settings have been set here whenever the accept button is, and we might do that. We'll see. The last one that we need for the world generation group is the spawn protection, and for this we decided to use a numeric up down with a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 256. 256 is basically 4 chunks, so that's quite a big distance. Should be more than enough. However, we don't exactly have a method that's capable of handling that particular range, so we'll put in a method for doing that. Let's see, that's the spawn protection set int spawn protection. We'll do it like this. Value int range equals fix int value. kind of need to know what kind of range is set, and then we need to check whether that range falls within the minimums, the maximums, and then do some default settings to, depending what kind of value we get. Again, if this particular setting turns up being empty, we could default it down to the minimum, or we could force it to always be 16 like the server generates it. So we'll do a check here to see if it's less than 4. Then maybe check for defaults if 0, else if range is greater than 256, then we'll simply just force it to become 256, and otherwise we'll return range. So if range equals 0, then we will return the default of 16, and otherwise we will simply just return 4. So if, for example, you set it to 3, then it would still return 4. However, if you set it to 0, it'll return 16. And this one is called nud spawn protection. So nud spawn protection dot value equals int spawn protection, fetch the one from the properties protection. There we go. And that should take care of populating this part. So world options, that's a bunch of checkboxes. So we'll go through those. The first one would be generate structures. So for the sake of remembering the exact names of these, I'll grab a copy down here and just put them in a comment. So the generate structures that checked equals, that would be a bool default, and get the value, and then we will set that to true. Then we can just grab these, speed up the process a little bit. The next one is spawn NPCs, right there, and we'll fetch that one, and this one also defaults to true. So right here, gotten rid of these. Verify the current step, animals, right there. We'll default, fetch that one, and default it to true. And that would be this setting. So we'll get that up there. And spawn monsters, which is right here. And again, we'll fetch that in case it's there and default it to true if it doesn't exist. So basically we can get rid of all the other stuff. But at least it showed us that I derped up one of the configs, so we got rid of that one. Enable command block, which is right here, checked. Default, server properties, get value, and this one defaults to false. It should never be enabled unless absolutely necessary. There we go. That takes care of these. And then the player options. And again, we have two drop downs, the game mode and the difficulty, that we basically need the same kind of setup as we did for the level type, so something similar to this. So let's get that out of the way. This would be the game mode selected index equals select game mode, and then we'll pass the value from the settings. Let's grab these just like we did before. Speed up process a little bit. That would be this one. There we go. Alright. Right here. Comment those. Stop the game mode up there. And then we need to create that method. And again, this one selects 0 as the default, so it's basically identical to this one, except it needs to reference a different box. So put that down here. I will go through and clean these up. Game mode, and do game mode. There we go, game mode. And this would then be the drop down game mode setting instead, and we're good. This would then be survival. The next one is the difficulty, which defaults to 1. So here we kind of need to add in a default setting and then check up against that as well. So the difficulty, selected index equals select difficulty, and we still need to fetch the setting from this server properties file, and then we'll force a value of 1 if it's not in there, like so, and then we'll create this one. And again, this one needs to return an index number within the combo box items range. So we'll difficulty and int default value. There we go. Kind of need to see if we actually are getting a number, so we'll do just like before. Difficulty, and then do a check. If this one is greater than or equal to 0 and it's less than the difficulty item count, whoops, then we'll simply just return this one. If it isn't, we will just return the default value, like so. And that takes care of that. Then we have a checkbox, or 2 actually. So we'll go see about the which one, hardcore, which again is one of these, server get, and this one defaults to false. Put that in there. And the player versus player right there. Fetch this, and this one defaults to true, like so. And then we have a couple of numeric, and we have a method for handling that, int default, so we'll set those. Again, these are numeric up downs. So that would be maximum players value, int default, get this one and have a default of 20, like so, and we should be good. And then the view distance, with the default value of 10. And that should take care of this. And finally, the checkbox that determines whether the server is whitelisted or not. So we'll grab this and set that up. And again, we'll grab a default value, in this case false. And setting right here. Boom. And that takes care of configuring that. Finally, we have the message of the day, which effectively becomes a string default, pretty much like we did with the level name, except here we don't exactly have a default handler for it. If we want to basically kill off this default setup stuff, we may need to implement a string default, so we can put it in there. There is one thing that we can add in as an extra feature, and that's basically a reset button. We could add in a reset button here that effectively kills off the current server configuration and then repopulates it using all the server default values. If we choose to do that, we definitely want to keep this default setup generator. So for now we will leave it in, and then down the line determine whether we want to put in a reset button or not. So here we'll quickly do a string default, string value, string default value. There we go. And the only thing this one needs to do is to figure out whether value contains something. If it does, return value. If it doesn't, return default value. That's it. So if value trim, in case somebody decides to throw in 200 spaces in there, then simply checking on the length of the string itself would return 200, even though it's just spaces and basically looks empty. By trimming it, we ensure that those spaces are thrown away. So if it has an actual length that's greater than 0, then we'll simply return the trimmed version of value, and in all other cases we will return the default value instead. There we go. See, the cool thing about this is that now we can change this to use string default, accept whatever's in the server properties, and default it to world if nothing's in there. And that allows us to do exactly the same thing for the MOTD. So string default, try and get whatever's in the server properties, and if nothing's in there, then we'll default to a Minecraft server. Boom. This should now take care of populating the entire dialog with whatever settings might be available or might have been generated, depending on the scenario. Okay, before this actually becomes useful, we still need to implement the two buttons. They need to be able to, if we click the accept button, we need to be able to actually update the server properties file with whatever's been chosen in the dialog itself. So write back all the changes and then save it to disk. If we cancel, then just bug out and don't save, of course. I'll do some cleanup on this before I push it to GitHub. Put a little bit of documentation in there. I imagine it would be quite boring watching me write all the documentation for this. I honestly don't know why I didn't put stuff in there already. I must have been sidetracked. Anyway, we don't seem to have the events for these two, so let's generate those. No point in typing the code out if we can have the ID generate them for us. And we'll grab these, move them up. Form events, that would be here. Control events. And stuff them in here. There we go. Dialog result, cancel, boom. And for the accept button, this one is where we need to update the server properties and then write it to disk. I just want to make sure that server path is a property or a variable somewhere. It's set there as server path, nice, which means it should be available here. Alright. I'll go grab the default generated stuff, and then we shall see if we can put them in here. And there's the accept button. Alright, so first of all, we need to set a value for the server IP, and that comes from the server bind IP text, and we'll trim it since we're putting strings into the server properties. Some of them we can grab directly, and some of them we need to convert to strings, like for example this one. So to ensure that we don't end up getting some kind of floating point value from the numeric up-down, which returns a decimal, we'll convert it to an integer first, and then to string it afterwards. There we go. Typo on my behalf. Then we need something that we can pass a checkbox to and either get the text true or false. There are ways of doing this differently. I'll show you an example. It's less readable than generating a method for it, but it's one of those coding shortcuts. In this situation, we could do something along these lines, which basically goes the online mode checked. If it has a value of true, then return true, otherwise return false. And that's basically it. So this is a quicker way of doing it. It's not particularly readable, so we'll put in a quick helper method here just for the sake of it. String convert checked. If value, then return true, else return false. There we go. Then we can do this convert checked, specify the online mode checked, and that does the same thing. This is more readable though. We'll leave that in. And this one, we need to ensure that a valid folder name has been specified, because this particular text will become the name of a folder where all of the world files are stored. So we kind of need to make sure that whatever the user typed in doesn't include things like a colon or an asterisk or a backslash or some weird stuff like that. As a developer, sooner or later everyone realizes that most users are born without brain and always do all the stuff they're not supposed to because they can't figure out what they're supposed to do, and then basically just like Homer Simpson, mash the keyboard and see what happens. Not a great way to use software, but if you go into it with that assumption and try to handle user input, assuming that they are Homer Simpson using a computer, then you should get away with it pretty decently. So here we kind of need to check and make sure that we actually have a valid text description in the level name, which would be this box. All the other stuff we don't really care about because the server internally handles that, but we do need to make sure that the level name is a valid folder name. So we need to remove any kind of invalid characters from it, or alternatively instruct the user put in a valid name here. If we, for example, see a question mark or a colon or an asterisk or a backslash or a question mark or something like that, we can basically tell the user those characters are not allowed, and then have the user correct it and try again. Alternatively, we can just pre-format it for the user by removing those illegal characters, and then see if the result of that turns into some kind of string. Level name cannot be empty, so there must be something in there. This is probably something that we should do before we attempt to save any of it. So we'll see if we can do something that can validate level name, string level name. And the way we do this is, for the sake of simplicity, we shall simply strip away all of the illegal characters. We'll do that quick, and see which ones we need to remove. We need to remove the colon because colon in a path specifies a separator between a drive and a path. We need to get rid of a backslash. Since this is C#, we need to escape it with a backslash. An asterisk is not allowed. A question mark is not allowed. The less than and greater than are not allowed, and the pipe symbol are not allowed. So these are the ones that we definitely need to remove. So we'll do that, level name.trim, and then we'll simply just force a replace of these by looping through them. And that would be the length of illegal. And then we'll simply just do result equals result.replace illegal. This actually needs to be converted to string so we can properly remove it, and then we will return the result and trim whatever spaces might be there. The reason for doing this is so we can do this level name equals validate level name, and then fetch the text box like so. And then if this has a length greater than 0, then we know we have something that should be valid. Okay. We will then move all of this stuff up here. There we go. If the level name is not valid, then we'll remember to throw a message to the user, and we'll go something like this. The level name must be specified and must be a combination of the letters A to C, both included, and that should be it. Please correct and try again. Whoops, that should be a comma. Invalid level name specified. Oops. so, and then we'll put an OK box in there. Sorry, OK button, and then I don't know, exclamation. Yeah, that's fine. And then for the sake of helping out the user, we will focus it. There we go. Okay. Then we need to set the actual level name right here, like so. And then we have another drop-down problem. Now, if for whatever reason our initial dialog population code doesn't exactly pre-select a specific entry within a drop-down box, the result is that the selected index property of the drop-down box will be -1, indicating no item is selected. That could pose a problem if we want to directly convert that into the number that we want to save for the level type. Since I like to make sure that things don't go wrong, I kind of want to put a wrapper around there that would allow us to pass the value and then maybe convert it into some default setting if whatever selected is out of bounds. So we'll do a quick extra helper method here, get combo box selected index, and then we'll do selected index and then default value. Now, the only reason we do this is just to make sure that some derp up with the UI doesn't cause this to generate faulty data. And since since we need to do this for 3 different drop-down boxes, I figured I'd just make a generic one. Okay, so if selected index is -1, then we will simply return the default value, and in all other cases we'll simply return the selected index that was passed. And we should probably turn this into a string instead, because we need to store it as a string. So we'll do this and do this. There we go. And do we really need this? No. Actually, we will convert this. Come to think of it, because we might as well just pass the actual combo box itself and then let this one figure it out, because we for level type we actually need to write the actual text. It's not a numeric type, but for game mode and difficulty we need the numeric value. So this one we'll leave for those as a generic one, and then we'll do another one for the level type. Get selected level type. Can't remember if we did this, and we'll just add a default index. Okay, so if drop down level type selected index is greater than -1, then we will have to do a little bit of checking, because in the configuration file it's not called superflat, it's called flat. All of them are capitalized, so we definitely need to do that as well. So those will be the things that we put in here. Switch level type selected index, selected index right there, and we'll just put these here quick and then as a reference. For index 0, that would be default. So we'll just return default. For index 1, we will need to return flat. For index 2, we will need to return arch biomes. For index 3, we will need to return amplified. And for index 4, we will need to return customized. There we go. And depending on the build of a modded server, some custom world generator a custom world generator might be a part of the server build. So at some point, to support that, we may have to add in another text box up here so that we can set the custom name of that terrain generator. For now, we'll just leave it as is. In this particular setup, it's not required, but it's a feature that might be interesting to have in there. Now, if actually don't need this. If none of this works, then we will end up down here, and that will just force us to return default. So this one should take care of that for us. So we'll grab that and stuff it down here. Level type, and there we go. And this one, generator settings, we honestly don't really care what kind of text is put in there, so we'll grab it directly from the text box. The same for the level seed. Again, trim to get rid of any spaces the user might have typed in. Allow nether would be a convert checked. Grabbing the allow nether.checked value. There we go. The spawn protection, that's basically the same as this, except a different up-down box. So we'll grab the right one, which would be the spawn protection. There we go. And another checkbox. So convert checked, which would be the generate structures.checked. There we go. And another one down here. So convert checked, spawn NPCs.checked, and convert checked for the spawn animals, like so. And again here for monsters, right here, and for the command block, convert checked, enable command block, like so. And here is the second drop down, the game mode. And for that purpose we have this one, so we'll use that. This would be the game mode dot selected index, and the default value will be 0. And for difficulty, selected index, a default value of 1. Another checkbox converter, conversion, hardcore checked. There we go. And one for PvP. Like so. Max players, again another numeric up down, because we have some range settings for them, and it just makes life so much easier. So we'll grab this one again and then just change it, and this would be the maximum players, and this one would be the view distance. Distance. I need a dot in there. There we go. And a conversion. There we go. And then for this one, we'll put in the string default. So we'll go string default and grab the MOTD text trim, and then use that as the default. There we go. Alright, so if we get to this point right here, we've got all of the settings stuffed into the individual keys, so now it's time to save them to disk. So we will do that. Server properties.save, and then this.dialog result equals OK. There we go. This closes this window, returning OK as the result. There we go. This should now take care of handling the creation of a default server properties file, as well as loading it and populating the dialog with whatever's in it, and also saving whatever changes might have been made. I'm saying this should work. We need to do a test to make sure that it actually does. But there's one thing that I need to do up here in the default creator, which is right here. Server properties.clear comments, and then I'll go fetch these from the wiki. Server properties.add comments. Right there. And another one. And I'll just grab what's up here. Because at some point the Minecraft server will change this text anyway. So this should be fine. Alright. Let's give this a run and see if it completely derps up or if it actually works. Alright, let's check the vanilla. Edit this one. Go to the properties and let's see. It's set to default, it shows survival, easy, PvP, it's whitelisted just like I did on the server properties, and for the sake of comparing, this is the right one. Online mode is set true, whitelisted is typically down here, whitelist true. Sheridan's vanilla 1.12.2 is in the message of the day. Level name is world, level type is default, allow the nether dimension, spawn protection 16, generate structures, blah 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 blah. And just for the sake of changing it, we will disable the command block, which should force a rewrite of the server properties when we click the accept button. Let's see what happens. Boom! It has been modified by another program. Reload, yes. There we go. Enable command block false. View distance was changed, which means there's a bug in there somewhere. For whatever reason, the view distance was set to 10. It wasn't updated, so it's something that we definitely need to look into. It was set at 7. Let's see if it correctly updates it. And it was updated correctly. Basically what happened was that part of the default initialization stuff went wrong somewhere, or wasn't properly updated, so it's something we need to look into. But cool enough, we now have a sweet, nice interface where we can change the values pretty quick and then do the update. See, in the config it says view distance 7, but in the dialog it popped up defaulting it to 10. So we need to look into why that happens. Okay. These are generated, and the populate dialog would be the one where stuff happens. So let's see, this would be the view distance. Let's see what happens here. Edit, properties, poof, there we go. Okay, so we'll go in here and see what happens. Key name, view distance, find this one. I should have stepped through it. Return this. There we go. Okay, so it fetches the value, which means it does have a length. Let's see. It's switched to 7, as it should, and that would be why. See, this one was written for the port default values, so we need to change this to fix that particular issue. And since we are reusing this particular method for other integer settings, we kind of need to create one that deals specifically with the server port defaults. So we'll do, let's see, yeah, we'll put it here, and port default, like so, and then we will grab this and the other stuff. So we've got it here. That takes care of that, and then we fix this one. Blah 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 blah. We'll call this result. And for this, we will actually we'll just return it. There we go. And if it doesn't have a length, then return the default value instead. Then we need to update this one, so it becomes port default instead, and now it should be okay. So let's edit this, get the properties, kill the debug, and view distance is correctly updated. And the same should hold true for max player slots. We'll put that at 10. And we should be good. So let's see. View distance was set to 7, just like expected. Player maximum max players was set to 10. There we go. Difficulty is set to 1. Let's change the difficulty to normal and see if that updates correctly. And it updated to 2. Nice. All of it seems to be updating correctly now, so we're good. The last thing we need to do in terms of all this configuration stuff is basically add in a default generation of the server properties within the server profile dialog. just in case the user doesn't click the properties button and start setting these. So we'll do that. There we go, server config dialog. We don't need you anymore. And we shall go fetch this one. So, we already did a little bit of code preparation because we did add in an empty method for checking the server properties file. And in this case, we will pretty much embed all of it within this one method, and then we'll go grab the keys from the different settings in the other dialog, and then do a quick string build and dump it in a file if it doesn't exist. So it shouldn't be all that big of an issue. First of all, we need to check whether it exists. So let's grab the path and the file name. In this case, it would be server properties, like so, and then check if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then we need to create it with some kind of default setting. So let's get something built here. Again, here I don't particularly want to instantiate another copy of the ini file. We can do it quicker and with less of a footprint by simply just building up a string containing all those default settings that we need to put in there. So we'll just do this and then build it up and write it to a file. Alright, so for that we need the default settings here. We'll grab this. So add this, and then we'll need a there we go. Next one, we need to dump this in. And server IP. And in this case, it needs an equal sign. So we'll do like this. Add in the line terminator. Hey Sky. And the server port. Grab these like so. And the online mode default settings. Like so. Next we need the level name, so we'll generate that. And then the level type. Like so. Adding the line terminator. Generator settings needs to be empty, so we'll leave that empty by just specifying the equal sign. And level seed we'll leave empty, just like the other one, like so. And the allow nether needs to be set true. That's the default setting. Like so. And the spawn protection we need to set to 16. equals 16. There we go. And generate structures. There we go. I know this is boring. Spawn NPCs and spawn aminals. Like so. And spawn monsters. And the enable command block. This one definitely needs to be disabled. And the game mode set to 0, which is survival. And the difficulty set to 1, which is easy. Not quite sure why they chose to set it to easy by default, but you never know. Those Swedish people, they do some weird stuff at times. Disable hardcore mode. Like it is. And the PvP mode enabled. Of course, we could at some point, if we wanted to, make up our own default settings for this. In case we want to run this in a fully custom setup thing for some reason. We don't exactly have to pick up their specific default values, but I feel that it's more correct to go with their default settings when we are generating a file that they usually generate for us. Whitelisting. Like so, and the final one will be the message of the day. So we'll go grab that one right here, and that is almost it. There we go. Finally, we need to dump this in a file, so to make sure that we don't end up crashing our application, we'll put this in a try catch. So we will do write all text to this one, and we want to write the settings, so we'll do that, and then we'll just ignore whatever might show up in terms of errors, and hope for the best, and that should pretty much be it. Part of the accept button on this dialog, we definitely need to place a call to this method, so we'll go find the accept button, which is right here, and place a call to this check server properties file. We also have the EULA file being generated if it doesn't exist. And that basically takes care of all of the configuration updates and changes that I wanted to get done today. I'll have a look at the settings for the Railcraft server just for the sake of it. And it correctly grabbed the port number, it's whitelisted, PvP is enabled. For some reason I have changed the difficulty to easy. Default blah 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 blah. All of it looks good. Even the message of the day shows up. So we're cool. Alright, so now that we have all of the configuration stuff implemented, we have a foundation for allowing us to grab some additional information to display on the UI. Part of what I wanted to implement on the UI is a status display of the current server state, meaning is it running, is it starting up, is it shutting down, is it stopped. I would also like to add a player count that on this UI shows the maximum number of players that can join in, how many are on if the server is running. I would like to grab the message of the day and stuff into the profile here, which of course means getting it from the server properties file. And I would also like to add in the port number that the server is running on. Pretty much like we have on this setup. See here we've got the custom name. It's already showing that. The status I decided to convert to icons. Those icons would be resources, graphics, status icons would be these 4 icons that we put in there to indicate the current status of the server itself. We may have to implement a flag or a status of some sort that can tell us by just examining the server profile what the actual status of it is right now, and then we simply just update that. The MOTD I wanted to put on, and I also wanted to put the port number on, and the players of course. So we will dig into those in a bit. But before we do that, I think I need another quick nature break, so I shall be back in a couple of minutes.